We welcome you to this session on telework and change and what's going on in our communities as a result of COVID and what the future might look like. I know that's not the actual session title, but that's actually what we'll be talking about. So my name is Justin Smart, and I'm fortunate to work with both Ted and Tom in a professional capacity. I work at Penna Powers. We're a firm that does communications work and strategic efforts around those types of things. So we work a lot with WFRC and UCAIR. And we'd like to thank, as many of you saw our title slide, we had a sponsor of CenturyLink for this workshop today. Several of you are likely participating via a CenturyLink uplink. So we appreciate their support of this conference and of this session and of the league and its efforts. We're going to get rolling. I'm going to start by introducing our two speakers. I've already mentioned their names. Tom Carter is with the Utah Clean Air Partnership. He's the executive director, and UCAIR, as it is commonly known, is a nonprofit organization established to bring communities together with one goal in mind: improving Utah's air. Tom has a diverse background, and it includes work in the political, the policy arena, alongside international experience in professional sports. In the policy world, he has served as an elected official in New Jersey and has also worked on policy initiatives in New Jersey and Utah tied to both healthcare and transportation, respectively. Carter's professional sports background includes growing Major League Baseball operations in Australia and helping to build a new indoor football league here in the United States. Tom grew up in the Northeast, went to Brigham Young University in Provo, and now at UCAIR, he sits on the board of governors for the Salt Lake Chamber, the Governor's Energy Advisory Council, and he co-chairs the Healthy Salt Lake Steering Committee. Tom was named a Utah Business 40 Under 40 in 2019, and he works diligently to bring partners together for collective impact in addressing Utah's air quality challenges. So we're going to hear from Tom in a minute. I'll also introduce Ted. Many of you know Ted is the deputy director at the Wasatch Front Regional Council, or WFRC, which is the metropolitan planning organization for the Salt Lake and Ogden-Layton metropolitan areas. Ted's focused his career on coordinating local placemaking with regional infrastructure planning. Prior to coming to WFRC, he worked with Friganesi Associates, Envision Utah, and the Planning Center, which has now become PlaceWorks. His experience includes efforts in Chicago, Denver, LA, and Salt Lake City that have garnered 2 prestigious Daniel Burnham Awards from the American Planning Association. In Utah, he led the development of Wasatch Choice, the region's official vision. Ted has a master's in urban and regional planning from Portland State University, is an adjunct professor at the U of U, and is a distinguished alumni of the College of Architecture and Planning at the U of U. He is the president of the Utah chapter of the American Planning Association and is the Planning Commission chair for North Salt Lake. So he not only talks about this stuff, he puts it into practice at those planning commission meetings, I'm sure. So we really appreciate the two of them preparing for this session. I have heard some of their material before, and this is going to be fascinating. Before we jump in with their presentations, though, we want to take a quick poll of those of you on the call with us to see where you come from. And so our technician for this session is going to present a poll to everybody, and should have popped up on your screen. And if you can just take that quickly, it kind of defines kind of who you are, where you're from, what your role is. We'll have an idea of who we're talking with today. Are we seeing results? Questioning our technician. Okay. Looks like we have a number of folks from city staff, about half of our audience. We've got a council member and a mayor with us, and then a few from state or county government, and a couple of folks who've just indicated they love attending conferences. So we'll take all of you. We appreciate you being with us. And let's see here. So just a quick point of process, I guess. We're going to have some initial presentations from both Tom and then Ted. And then the three of us, I've got a couple of questions prepared to start some discussion with the two of them. And then we do want to open it up to our audience, our attendees today, to pose some questions or make some comments about the material that's been covered. And the way that we're asking folks to do that is via the chat function. And before we got started, we had somebody already chime in on the chat. So when you, down at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, there should be you may have to touch your screen or move your mouse around a little bit. There's a little toolbar. There's one that says chat. If you click that, it should open up on the right hand of your screen, or it might pop up in its own little box. And that's where you can type in a question or type in a comment. Maybe reserve those for the end, but if you have something that's really a burning desire to get into the conversation right away, chat those in and I'll work them into the discussion. So just with a little bit of a preamble, in March, as you're all very aware, pretty much everything changed. How we got around, how we worked, how we shopped, how we recreated. Just as a few examples from a long list of changes that we've all been dealing with. And Ted and Tom have thought a lot about, collected a lot of information about the way things have changed, and they've also done a lot of thinking and looking ahead about what changes might be in our future. And that of course includes good and bad. And so we're going to hear first from Tom about a telework survey that UCAIR conducted, and then we'll go to Ted to talk about a lot of trends and implications that they've been following at WFRC. And without further ado, I'm just going to pass the floor to Tom and get out of the way for now.
Thanks, Justin. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here with you on behalf of the Utah Clean Air Partnership and in partnership with WFRC and the Utah League of Cities and Towns. You know, at UCAIR, as Justin said, we are committed to ensuring that everyone understands first what our air quality problem here is, and then secondly, how they can be part of the solution. And as Justin mentioned, you know, when the governor had his first stay safe, stay home directive, things just started happening and happening fast. And for years at UCAIR, we'd been talking about telework as a short-term and long-term air quality solution for the state. As most of you know, 50% of our emissions in the midst of an inversion come from tailpipes, and here's an opportunity to get at least commuter miles off the road. But for years, we'd been hearing kind of pushback in kind of three different modes or stumbling blocks. Those were just general attitudes, perceived productivity, and infrastructure. And you know, in March, early April, we were seeing some of those stumbling blocks just melt away. Infrastructure was a big piece of that, and we could talk about what we're doing today as a part of that infrastructure solution, right? I didn't spend much time on Zoom. I didn't know Zoom. Probably that first week, we signed up for a paid subscription to Zoom. In fact, if I had a DeLorean and a flux capacitor and 1.21 gigawatts of energy, I'd go back in time to February and buy stock in Zoom. That's all I would do. I wouldn't warn anybody of a pandemic. I would buy stock in Zoom. So infrastructure's been an interesting solution. We want to understand if attitudes and productivity had changed or increased or decreased. And so we partnered with a number of great organizations, and I'm going to pull up this data to see what was going on. We did a large-scale survey, a pulse survey, the first 2 weeks of June. And if you remember kind of the ebb and flow of the pandemic here in Utah, we were on a very positive trajectory in that first week of June. Then we saw case counts skyrocket back in July. We saw another reduction in August, and we are where we are in September. So things continue to ebb and flow. But we took that first couple weeks in June to really going on. If attitudes had changed, what was happening. So I'm going to share my screen and walk you through some of the questions we asked, some of the data we received, and what our direction was. All right, there we go. So, as you can see, these are the organizations we partner with: EDC Utah, the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, the Chamber, the county, Solid County, the Utah Department of Environmental Quality, UDOT and the TravelWise program, the League, and of course WFRC. And, based on initial studies and information, we knew that a number of organizations had gone to telework. We wanted to gather that data, find out what was going on, and really see what was happening. We sent out this survey through these organizations and had 7,500 respondents, which is a lot. Gives us a lot of data in that time period. We had 2 tracks in this survey. One was for employees and one for executives and managers. You can see this breakdown that 72% of our respondents were from the employee track and 30% from executive and managers. We saw it from multiple ranges of businesses and industries throughout the state, and that was the benefit of having these great partners. So we asked first, what's your telework participation? And our respondents said that 97% are doing some sort of teleworking during the pandemic, with 55% of organizations surveyed say they were exclusively teleworking. So that means the other 45% were either had a quarter, a third, a half, 2/3, 3/4 of their organization teleworking. And of course, not every profession lends itself to telework. Not every opportunity can do that. But with 97% of respondents saying they're doing some sort of telework or having some part of their workforce teleworking, we thought, wow, this is interesting, and we want to find out more. So we asked, what was your attitude about telework prior to it? So 66% of employees said they liked the idea of telework prior to the pandemic, and 57% of employers had a positive attitude towards telework prior to the pandemic. But here's the thing: when we took this survey in June, 86% now have a positive attitude towards telework. That's a 20 to 30% jump in attitude, and that's a big deal. And we could talk about why or what happened, and we have some of that data as well. But there have been a lot of good experiences, and people are having positive experiences being at home or around or feeling safe, and so that was really really great for us. Let me share with you some of our reported benefits. We mentioned the stumbling block of productivity. Employees say that 93% of them either maintained or increased productivity working from home, which, again, being self-reported, we appreciate that. People are feeling like they're busy, they're getting their work done, and that's great. Now, additionally, these are kind of benefits and additional benefits. 92% of people responded saying that they love the benefit of having reduced or no commute. 85% say they're saving money. 72% said they love the benefit of increased time with loved ones. And that's from the employee side. From the employer side, 68% of employers said they were saving money as well. Reported costs as an organization. And it says here, we listed utilities, travel, meal, etc. 61% of employers reported improved mental health and attitude. People just being at home, giving more opportunities, being safe. And then this productivity piece here from employers saying 56% of employers report seeing increased productivity among their employees. So we think that those are great signs, that this is provides for an opportunity to maybe a shift in the paradigm. These are great benefits. We've had kind of an internal conversation about the 28% of people who don't see it as a benefit. They're spending more time with their loved ones, but I'm not here to judge. That's what's going on there. But it's not all sunshine and roses, right? The biggest concern that came back is that more than 50% of employees and employers cited a limited connection with coworkers and a decreased sense of team. That's their biggest concern. And we see that. We're in the relationship business where we want to spend time with people. We want to get to know what's going on. There's also this element that you kind of lose an element of this there's an idea that you lose an element of creativity and spontaneity when you're not in an office with people. And so we understand and appreciate that concern. The big question that we had from an air quality perspective is answered here in this section, where 94% of executives and 93% of employees said they'd be willing to telework specifically for poor air quality days. And that's a big deal, right? If you think about as we build into an inversion, right, when that lid goes on and we trap not just our cold air, but all our emissions, and the longer the lid stays on between storms, whether they're rain, wind, or snow, the worse our air quality becomes in that winter period. We have executives and employees saying, look, if it could help for us to stay home for 3 days, we believe that we're willing to do it, and we know that it could help mitigate the effects of inversion. We love this data, and we think that we've been working with some community partners, some business partners about putting in an inversion mitigation program related to telework. It's an interesting timing because, again, a number of our partners aren't sure when they'll even be going back related to the pandemic, but we're interested in this. But as it relates to just teleworking in general, 95% of organizations reported a willingness or a desire to continue teleworking in the future, but only 11% said they wanted to do it every day. 30% said a few times a week, with the remainder, almost 60%, saying a few times a month or quarter. Now, this is interesting. Does this mean there's a huge future paradigm shift related to related to telework moving forward? We don't know, right? And that's kind of the theme of 2020. It's I don't know, and we'll see. We do think there are opportunities for behavioral change. We do think that at least around kind of air quality opportunities, we're bullish about this. What's great is that TED and WFRC have additional data that goes along with this that can provide a great fuller picture. And so I think I'll stop what I've got and throw it back to Justin so we can throw it to Ted.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That actually is a great setup for the information Ted's about to share, which is kind of about trends across a number of different areas, such as retail, outdoor recreation, transportation, and even mobile source emissions. So without any more interlude than that, Ted, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Justin. I am just taking a second to get my presentation going. It's amazing how, something that you do a million times, it becomes hard when you need to do it. There we go. Okay. Hey, it's so great to be with all of you today and at this conference. And I just want to briefly say that I love the people that are plugged into local government issues. I find that those that are working to make life better locally, they're not motivated by glory. They're not motivated by money. They're motivated by just helping the world be a better place in the space where you're most closely related to the changes that you can put in place. So it's an honor to be with you today. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about data that we're seeing, especially on the transportation front. Then we're going to do a look ahead. And as I go through this, I'd like you to think about, well, what are the implications for my community? Okay. I'm showing you data that's current as of August statewide, and I'm contrasting what happened in August versus a normal month before this August, sort of pre-COVID. Okay, so starting with retail trips to brick and mortar retail down 7%. Something like that, you have to think about the total breadth of all retail trips. That is a very significant drop. And yet, it's nothing compared to the work trip drop, which is a 40% drop. Building off of what you saw from Tom, this is monumental. And obviously we're practicing it right now, right? we're all porting in from, most of us from our homes into this session. And it's so fascinating that COVID-19 has not just been a shift in this in the pattern of teleworking, but we've also been doing it for so long, a lot of us, that we've worked it out into our lifestyle and we're developing habits. Now let's look at some other data pieces. Come on. Transit trips are presently down 60% from where they used to be. That is a very significant shift as well. Now we're seeing that come back. Transit trips are coming back. I anticipate that they will come back completely, just like I think people are going to go to the movies and people will choose to go to restaurants. And it's simply because there are advantages to a lot of people to return to those kinds of patterns of behavior, but there's some uncertainty there. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Bicycle trips, in August, they were up 40%. If you look at previous months, they were up significantly more than in August. And one question might be, we had the hottest August in Utah on record. That might have had a role to play here. So kind of think of it that there's been a 50 to 100% increase in bicycle trips across Utah during COVID-19. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Now, a lot of what we're seeing take place as people have sort of limited the amount of recreation that they've done in built up places, restaurants and shopping. They've been doing a lot less of that. They've been doing a lot more trips to open space. Now this includes trailheads, but it includes the parks that are in your cities as well.
Hey, Ted.
Yeah.
Just jumping in real quick. Your slide appears to have frozen. I don't know whether that's something on your end or something that our tech can address. I don't know how far ahead you are. I just didn't want to get too far behind.
Well, I will keep on keeping on, and hopefully the tech can let me read you the numbers, okay? So the bicycle trips, transit trips negative 60%, bicycle trips plus 40%, open space trips plus 160%. Okay, so it's more than doubled and almost tripled the amount of usage at our parks and trailheads. That is a phenomenal increase. Now, how does this add up? If you're thinking about, well, there's a reduction in certain kinds of trips, there's less transit. What does this mean when we think about, the experience of driving on a freeway and for air quality? It does vary across the state, but freeway volumes are down, but they're only down about 5 to 10% statewide. So think about this. Even though we have 40% of all of the trips to work are now essentially occurring through telework, the freeway volumes themselves are only down 5 to 10%. So it's a really fascinating story. And that approximates to the impact on air emissions from transportation. So the transportation related air emissions down about 5 to 10%. I'm really not sure why you can't see my, can you, all right.
Our tech suggested that maybe you unshare and reshare your screen. Now I'm seeing your cursor live and everything. Okay, I'm seeing the picture.
This was user error, I'm afraid. I think that I accidentally paused my share at some point.
Oh, okay.
And now we're back. So
great.
All right. Now, bicycling. Key questions on the bicycling front. How much of these new additional bicyclists are actually new people that haven't really been in the habit of bicycling before, and how much of it are people that have always bicycled and now they're just bicycling more. We think about approximately half of, it's a 50% increase approximately in the number of new bicyclists. Now, so think about this from the local government perspective. You've got a bunch of people trying bicycling that haven't before. What is the experience that they're getting now? Well, they may be experiencing bicycling on streets where there is less traffic than there might have been pre-COVID. In some communities, you see this image, this is from Salt Lake City. Nope, it's from Austin, Texas, but there's images like this in Salt Lake City of some communities who have said, you know, we're gonna change some streets and limit them to through traffic in order to make them more friendly for bicycling. And so this is a question for you all in your community. Are you doing things that sort of help welcome a new audience to bicycling, or not? And by the way, it's not too late. So you can think about this. This is the kind of thing to help this positive phenomenon become a habit for people. And that is having streets that feel good to bicycle on. Part of the story here is also about electric bikes. Electric bikes are flying off the shelves, so to speak. This was just in Utah Business 2 days ago. Electric cars are not the future, electric bikes are. I don't have numbers on this, but it's part of the phenomenon of a significant growth in bicycling, is that it becomes an easier thing for people that are not part of the spandex crowd to engage in. Now, here's a key thing I want you to think about. So we have fewer trips to retail. We have a lot more telework. We have a lot more bicycling. We have a lot more trips to parks and open space. In the aggregate, you could think of this as it being a great localization of activity. So think about the office worker. You know, they get up in the morning, they commute to downtown, take that image on the left, and what do they do when they're downtown? They do a little shopping, they eat at restaurants, they might enjoy a nearby park, right? And so they are picking in part their office environment based on even the location of office, based on the amenities that support the day, that time between 9 to 5. Well, all of those demands are now adding to what people are looking for in their neighborhood. So the neighborhood activity, the neighborhood amenity, all of those things, right? Park usage, bicycling, is part of this story of people saying, hey, what can I do near me? Never before has a person's neighborhood had to do so much work, had so much importance. It's not just a place for after 5 p.m. and on the weekends. It's the place that you're living, you know, almost all of your week now, if you're a new teleworker. And this builds off of trends that we had been seeing before COVID-19, in which there were questions about, you know, what's the kind of retail that was still doing okay, even as retail was shifting towards Amazon, that kind of thing. So we basically saw that the forms of retail that were amenities, that were places that people wanted to spend time in, right? A Main Street, a neighborhood-friendly community shopping center, those were doing well. The places that were not doing well were the brick and mortar retail spots that were competing on price. Those that are competing on price are losing to the Amazonization. And I think that what we're seeing with COVID-19 is accelerating this trend. This supports the notion that the amenity package near your neighborhood is now never been more important. And you know, you could think of this as the nickname, the great localization, right? So home is where your heart is, and that heart is where, let's say, your home is. What does this mean? People are demonstrating with patterns of behavior that they're looking for safe bicycling. They want parks near them. To the extent they are still shopping, they're looking for a quality of life retail. People are still going to be needing to eat. They're not going to get an amazing meal through Amazon. Probably not going to get a good haircut through Amazon. You know, maybe there's some weird models like that. But, you know, I want you to sort of noodle on what is the evolving role of the neighborhood and of the community in the time where telework is a totally much bigger phenomenon. Now, this comports with the Wasatch Choice concept. The Wasatch Choice concept is local governments asking themselves, well, where are the hearts of our communities? Where are these centers? Where do we gather as a community? What are those locations? You know, this concept of town centers or new city centers in communities, I think relates to this phenomenon. Now, I'm doing a time check because I don't want to take up way too much time here. But now let's reflect on this. So if we have a big jump up in the number of people that are teleworking, what this does is it reduces their need to be near their work. Now, it doesn't eliminate it, but if commute distance was a driver in where people bought their home, that commute distance now falls as a driver in where people choose to buy, where they relocate. So what replaces that? One thing is a certain subset of those, let's call them new teleworkers, are, again, they're going to be looking for what's the amenity package in and near the neighborhood. If I'm spending so much time in my home, what can I get to really easily near my neighborhood? That's a question. Now, a chunk of teleworkers, let's say communities, they can't find a lot of spaces where there's sort of an amenity-rich package near a neighborhood, and those opportunities are fairly limited. We might see a big segment of those, you know, new teleworkers then saying, well, if I can live almost anywhere because I'm teleworking, well, I'm going to be driven by looking for low costs. And that means housing, that means cost of transportation, right? It also means how much housing you can buy. And these two things have very different stories and outcomes for our metro area. The story on the left, to the extent the new teleworker is attracted by that they're going to look for that in existing communities that they already know. If they're mainly focused on low costs and they want to just save money, then they may sort of drive till they qualify, you know, if you will, go further out from the heart of metro areas until the land is inexpensive enough that they can build the home that they want or buy the home that they want, because location doesn't matter as much. There's lots of winners and losers community to community on these two questions. I would say that one question about the image on the right is, does this mean that we actually swamp the benefits for air quality and we swamp the benefits for infrastructure because people have decentralized so much that their other trips, right? You know, most of the trips of the day are not the commute. Their other trips are longer. They're in locations where new roads need to be built. And the net effect could be that we actually lose so much of the air quality potential benefit that comes with the telework. And this is a real sort of question that we have before us today. Looking ahead, these are guesses. They're educated guesses, and you know they'll be wrong. But let me give you a sense of some sense of where we think maybe these numbers are going to go from here. Retail will come back some, but I think it will never come back to the level from before COVID-19. People are getting into the habit more and more of shopping online. There's a big question about how much telework stays. 40% is an incredibly significant number. Even if we keep 10% or a fourth of that that represents a dramatic change in the trip to work. Transit, big question mark. How much does it come back? Does it come back even better? Is this an opportunity for, the Utah Transit Authority to think about, well, how do we shift our business model a little bit to meet the new realities? So there's a big question mark there. Bicycling, open space, guesses about how much we hang on to there, maybe about half. And there's such a big difference in terms of what we might expect in terms of freeway emissions and air emissions. And it sort of depends on how the line items above, how they break, how much transit comes back, how much people do choose to telework. And then over time, as the new teleworkers start to relocate their homes, what are the implications of that? So this is kind of unpacking these kinds of questions, and you may be interested in exploring that in a Q&A. And I'll just note that, transit is a big part of the reason why there's such a spread there on the freeway volumes and air emissions. It's because we really don't really know exactly what might happen with transit. So I hope that has been interesting and not too much time. Justin, I'm going to hand the baton back to you and look forward to questions.
Great. Thanks, Ted. This has been a really useful look at the trends we're seeing. Obviously what Tom presented was a little bit of a deep dive in one aspect of change that we've seen, and Ted provided a great overall perspective of a number of aspects. I'll just remind folks that are participating, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please feel free to chat those in. I've got a few questions that I'd like to pose to both Tom and Ted. And my first one is for both of you. And Ted alluded to this a little bit as we kind of look into the crystal ball and look into the future. There's some trends that obviously have positive implications if they were to continue. There's also some potentially downsides to some of these trends that could continue. Ask each one of you if you can just take one of your data points or one of your things that you've seen going on right now and talk a little bit about what the upside of that is moving forward and what a potential downside of that might be moving forward. So Tom, maybe let's start with you, and then Ted, if you want to respond to that same question.
Oh, that's a good question. So I think one of the positives of just kind of the general telework piece is, the way I view it is, and this we didn't cover this at all, but if there is this significant shift, and even with using Ted's educated guess of workplace emissions going from either on the low end to less than 20% or less than 10%, right? That's the positive can be, positive numbers are significant, right? But we're going to talk about it in relation to not mobile sources, but on area sources. Right, think about the emissions base from a large commercial building. We rent space out of a 4-story building that currently sits fairly empty. And you take out the emissions related to heating and cooling and lights and all of that stuff. You're going to knock down, initially, the anticipation is you're going to knock down a lot of area source emissions from one major area source, where it relates to kind of the boiler and all of that stuff. That's a big deal. That's great, not just to save all those mobile source emissions, but also save some area source emissions. The adverse side of that is that you're going to pump up your area source emissions from your homes. Think about how your homes can sit empty with the heating and cooling off, with the lights off, with everything off for hours at a time during the day. But now, when you're home, especially think about, Ted mentioned this, we had the hottest summer on record. how many people were running air conditioning all day. In the past, you'd crank up you'd turn off or you move it up to 78 or 79 during the day and time it with a smart thermostat to come back down to 72 when you're coming home at night. So there's an element of trade-offs that maybe won't see with the area source community that we'd be hopeful for. That's just one thought off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's a great example, and one that a lot of folks wouldn't have thought about. I know that I spent a lot of time at home in March and April, and yeah, we probably did run the AC a little bit more. Ted, let's throw it to you.
Yeah, it's this is a really fascinating time in the history of cities, and I highlighted one of the big issues might be, well, what happens to people's locational decisions that stems from telework, and it could reward communities that have a package of amenities localized, and it could also result in a massive decentralization of development patterns, which could be very expensive and really bad for our air quality. So I think there's a huge fork in the road there. That'll be fascinating. Now, there's also this just larger debate right now about what's the role of cities generally. Cities have existed throughout time as a way for us to interact socially, economically. It's been really about how we can exchange, ideas and goods, and we're always going to need to do that. But that has been the story of places. It's been the story of downtowns, and it's been the story of main streets, and it's been the story of we can picture these gathering places in our communities. Does that start to melt away? To what extent does the UPS truck start to replace some of those things? And in long term, do people stop socializing as much? And does the role of cities start to reduce just sort of that foundational value of cities? So maybe that's too vague and dumb, but there is really a question about it. I actually think that we're way too social creatures, and that we will come back and value those sort of human interactions, and maybe we will almost even more so because we've been starved. But even on just the transportation front, and I think Steve Mumford asked a terrific question on this front. And Steve's question is, it seems to make sense that restaurant uses in communities would increase due to increased teleworking, but in the near term, with a lot of drive-through and a lot of pickup, does that result in increased traffic throughout neighborhoods and less walkability? That's the kind of risk, I think, not just now, but after COVID-19 is over. How much do we start to see visits to restaurants be replaced with people just getting stuff sent to us? And it's not just the restaurant model, it's all kinds of different models. What are the air quality impacts? Freight flowing through our neighborhoods at much higher levels. What does that mean for the livability of our neighborhoods? These are kind of big, weighty questions that we can grapple with. And I think we need to get a better sense of what this means, the trade-offs for local traffic and air quality as well. So it's just, there's more question marks than answers right now.
Just to piggyback on that too, Ted, anecdotally, my wife and kid and I, we sit outside just about every single night just to relax and enjoy the nature of it all. But every single night, the people across the street from us and next to us get a delivery from some food vendor, right? Which is great. I lived that life a lot before I got married, but it's an interesting new level of mobile emissions. And you and I have talked about this a lot, where we saw a 40% decrease in commuter miles, but there was a significant increase in freight, like you mentioned, freight and trucks and all that. There was an initial problem with, boy, I am having a hard time with my words today. with supply chain, but that yeah, there was a supply chain problem early on, but that got solved for the most part. And so we're seeing a lot more truck traffic and delivery traffic, and so there's a big trade-off. And I think to your point, I think there could be a concern about, I agree, we are very social creatures, right? That's the human makeup. But I get concerned about isolationism and even kind of tribalism, in the sense that, well, now I don't need to live near work, and so me and 10 families of people that I completely agree with and will only agree with and never have to have a disagreement with, we're going to go and build out in the West Desert, and we're just going to live there because we have great access to high-speed internet, and that's a concern, right? May not happen, but that's one of the issues that we need to be aware of how do we ensure that the sense of community where we can be together, we can disagree without being disagreeable, we can all come together and find ways to get along happens. And oftentimes the workplace is where that happens.
Yeah, there's a broad spectrum of changes that we could be facing and we could be seeing in the near, mid, and longer term. Tom, I want to shift gears a little bit, but not too far. You mentioned both mobile source, which are all our vehicles, and area source, which are all our buildings. And I want to take that maybe a little bit away from an air quality context and more into a business context. Your results would indicate that, and couple those with Ted's presentation, we're going to see some sort of stickiness to telework beyond the pandemic. I mean, as an agency here at our workplace, we've implemented a new telework policy that allows for greater teleworking. And so we're just one example. We're a small employer, but we're doing that. And so I'm curious, I know you run in a lot of different circles, and as more and more employers decide to adopt and make this telework an option, what does that mean for commercial real estate? Like, that's another one of those trade-offs, right? What are you hearing, and what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's $1 million question right there, Justin. I mean, most of our data on this is anecdotal, where we're hearing people who have 4 floors, currently use 4 floors on a building, they are going to go to 1. There's a UCAIR partner that we deal with, and a big business that is located in the south part of Salt Lake County, and they currently own 1 building and lease another building. Their lease is up, and 50% of their workforce pre-COVID were in each building, and their lease is up in 2021, and they're just going to walk away from that lease in 21, and they hope 50%. They plan on having that 50% of workforce be teleworking, and one of the things we talk about is this has been a great opportunity. It's been a great learning experience because, no one's been doing traditional telework for the last 6 months. There's been a lot of at work, working from home, trying to manage different situations. We're in the middle of a pandemic. And so it's not like when you define telework where you have a committed space, and committed line, and no distractions, with 2 high schools basically shutting down the last couple of days, that shifted the perspective just in the Sandy region of Salt Lake County as well. So, but what are we seeing from commercial real estate is the commercial real estate brokers and developers are kind of in a kind of come to Jesus moment where they're like, either we adapt or we die. Now, there's still a lot of development and building going on. And some of those are for banks where there have been rules and regulations that have been loosened during the pandemic so people can work from home. But this idea that, and we've had these conversations, it's directive where, look, our data shows that only 11% of people want to do this full time. So how do you, and look at some office setups where, with open office plan, you're not 6 feet apart. You're sitting on top of each other. You maybe have 2.5 people in a 6-foot space. And so you want, as a business owner, you might want people to telework because you don't want to get more square footage. So we're encouraging our friends in the commercial real estate space business to help adapt the mindset of what an office should look like, and to realize that, you know, work can be whatever you need it to be.
Can I
Great.
jump in on this?
Please do.
Justin. So, in a lot of ways, the pandemic, it exaggerates things that were already in motion. So on the retail front, right, brick and mortar that was trying to compete on price is the hardest hit. Brick and mortar before COVID-19 that was competing on experience was doing really well, because you can't provide experience online in the same way. Now on the office side, think about what this means on the office side, and we're hearing this. I don't have data on this, so this is anecdotal, but I've heard this from a number of office developers that the office that will continue to thrive is the office environment where managers are going to meet with clients, where there is an external interaction kind of function. The office that is going to tend to be replaced by telework are those functions that can be done anywhere and don't have a relationship to external client interactions. Well, what does that mean for cities? That means that the office locations that are walkable and bundled with amenities, they're actually going to do really well. And the office park that was just about sort of warehousing people in cubicles, those are going to be the suffering spots. By the way, that was already the trend. So we already saw this. This was already in place, and it's accelerating it. So office doesn't melt away completely, but the office that can be done anywhere will be the most vulnerable. This doubles down, I think, the basic idea for communities. How desirable is your built environment? Is it walkable? Do people want to spend time in places? If you're talking about retail and office, then that's got to be where you hang your hat on.
Well, Ted, you and I, Justin, you've been a part of these conversations, and Andrew Gruber as well, where like the legislature stepping up and opening up the opportunity for more transit-oriented development, I think is a huge win for development as it relates to exactly what you're talking about here, Ted, because it is that planned-based community that has multi-use, with different kinds of housing options, with different kinds of office options, that's walkable, that has transit near it. It's going to has a bit of a hub with the retail that people that you talk about, Ted, that's has experience related to it. I think is all provides a footprint and a blueprint for the future of development as we move out and as we develop it. And to your point about those kinds of jobs, my wife is in programming, and she's, even before the pandemic, she's like, I don't even know why I go into the office. I don't talk to anybody any day. It's just people are there. I don't anticipate her ever going back. And that's a big win for air quality. It's a big win for commuting. It's a big win for rural Utah. The Lieutenant Governor's been talking about this for a year and a half, where we can move all kinds of jobs to rural Utah to where there's high-speed broadband internet. You can take these people off of the Wasatch front and say, look, you can do any of these jobs, any of these state jobs that are not about personal interaction or sales or management. And then the other piece, this is also anecdotal, where we're seeing people from California who can buy 3 times the house for what they're paying in California and telework back into California. So we will get their sales tax, their property tax, their income tax. We just won't get their payroll tax. And all this is good for us in the long run.
Good stuff. Looks like we had another question come in. Let's see. I'll just read it from Alan Riddensbacher. ULCT members should be aware of the Rural Workforce Network. This is kind of to your point, Tom. At the Rural Utah Economic Summit in Cedar City in October 2019, Department of Workforce Services, the Salt Lake Chamber, and EDC Utah entered an agreement to help create rural remote jobs. The pandemic proved that remote work works. We're using Tom's survey data to confirm that we continue to promote rural remote work. RWN partners are educating businesses and rural economic development partners to create rural remote jobs and encourage potential employees to prepare for remote work. An initiative to encourage remote work and build rural Utah's economy. So there's an example. I think he's chiming in to kind of echo or reinforce what you're getting at, Tom, and that is, you know, work could be done just about anywhere. And maybe I'll springboard off that.
For rural Utah, I love that comment.
Thanks, Ted. And thanks for chiming in, Alan. I'll continue to invite anyone with a question or a comment to type it in on that chat, and we'll work those into the conversation. While we're waiting for others to ask questions, Tom or Ted, you made a statement that I typed out here. Never before has a neighborhood had to do so much work, and that resonated with me. We've got a number of local representatives in the session here, be they elected officials, be they staff folks. But what does this mean for them? I mean, as what do they need to be thinking about in terms of, you know, what if their neighborhoods aren't ready to handle that kind of work? They don't have the skill set, if you will, to handle that kind of work. You know, how do they respond to that growing demand potentially for amenities and centers nearer to housing?
Thank you for that question. I think you analyze your community based on proximity and access. You look at your community with questions like the following: what percentage of the residents in my city can reach a good-sized community park within a half a mile? In other words, they could bicycle to it. And you can map that out, and you can find locations where there might be holes. And then you might ask yourself, well, is there an opportunity? Are there pieces of land that we could explore expanding park opportunities in those parts of town? So you do some of this basic analytics. Now, on the placemaking side, if we're talking about, you know, a walkable place, maybe not a lot of retail, but a little bit of retail, where do you do that? How do you do that? And I think that the good and the bad news is, in so many communities, there's been a lot of land held for retail. And this is actually a big opportunity for us in the United States. So the United States has, across the country, we have held more land for retail than any other country in the world, like by a big factor, like something like 300% higher than even Canada. It's not that the market is that much different. It's just that we have tended to focus a lot of our placemaking on holding space for retail. And that just gives us a big opportunity. I think it's a question for communities. Well, which of those areas, maybe it's even the areas that are doing the worst in terms of performing in the marketplace, right? Sales are low, values are falling. Identify those locations and ask yourself, which of those spaces are subject to a rethink, a revitalization, a complete different mindset. This is the kind of thing that you do in a general plan, right? So you gather your citizens together, you think, you lay out some of the facts. You know, the world has changed on us. It's good and bad, but it is the case that we're in a different place. This is a great time for us to take a fresh look at our general plan. Let's talk about where our community gathers. Let's talk about the reality of the marketplace. let's talk about how we fit into creating the community that is going to thrive for the next 20 years. And the model is different than it was. Now, I hear myself saying this. I hear myself saying to local leaders, you know, engage in long-range planning, and that may come across a little tone deaf, as in, hang on a second, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic here. This is not the time for long-range planning. Maybe you don't do it right now, but when you feel like you've got your legs under you, you know, you've gotten through the worst of the sort of the emergency, I would suggest, you know, you got to take a new look at these kinds of questions. The amenity package is not just parks. The amenity package is not just retail gathering spaces. The amenity package includes still libraries. The amenity package includes what's the character of your streets. So if there is this burgeoning demand to bicycle, you could ask yourself, are there ways that we can make our streets more friendly to walk and bicycle? These are the kinds of questions that every community can engage in, and they're perhaps even especially ripe for communities that are, you know, built out or largely built out. Ask yourself these questions. Streets can always be modified. Parks can be harder to add. And there's this huge churning with regard to retail space, and those spaces can be repurposed.
Great. Lots to think about there. And you're right. It is a little bit of an ask to say, look 20 or 30 years out right now when we're in the midst of all of this craziness that everybody's dealing with. But there's definitely a link between decisions being made here and now and the outcomes that we want maybe later. So I'm still not seeing any questions in the chat. So I have a list that I'll continue to work through, but feel free to chime in and we'll jump to those questions that come in from our audience as soon as they show up. Tom, I want to come back to something that you said during your presentation. I find it intriguing that you list out all these benefits that people found from working from home. And then when asked how often they would like to do it moving forward, the majority said just a few days, a month, or a quarter. So, you know, a lot of benefit, but still seeing a desire to be in the office. And now still there were about a third that said they wanted to do it a few times a week. So that's also a decent group of folks. I'm just curious what anecdotally maybe you've heard as you've had conversations around this data about why people maybe, you know, 2/3 and a third are still in a every once in a while or a less regular space of telework.
Well, I mean, there's that 28% of people that hate spending time with their family. I mean, there's that. Too far? That felt too far as it was coming out of my mouth. You know, I think that it goes back to that 50% of people are saying that they're missing what they miss out of the office, right? That element of collaboration, the sense of teamwork. I think we haven't, it's only been 6 months. We haven't figured out how to duplicate that over Zoom, over Google Meets, over Teams, over whatever your piece is, right? Over just chat. I was talking to a partner earlier this week, and he said, you know, his struggle has been that his management style is management by popping. And on Microsoft Teams, you have the ability to just, and it's kind of same with Google Chat, where you can just hit the like call button and you're right there in front of someone, but it's not the same thing as just popping in and seeing how you're doing. What's going on? Tell me how your day is going. Tell me what your challenges are, what you're working on. I think that there's that element of you never know what interesting idea you're missing out on because you're just not talking to people on a daily basis. In that unstructured, unique way that sometimes great ideas come from. And, you know, and Justin, you and I have had those meetings where we've been sitting in your office or in my office or at lunch, and all of a sudden we've come up with something, or maybe you've already had the idea and you're trying to steer me into that direction of coming up with an idea, where, you know, I think there's that element of that. Additionally, I think there's an element of, there's a desire for normalcy in a time that is just so unprecedentedly abnormal. You know, this idea of if I can get just back to the office for a few days a week, it'll feel normal. And these are just, you know, my experiences, my guesses, my conversations with our partners and our friends and the business community, you know, but I'll tell you, you know, and this is maybe overly personal, but those of you who know me, I know I have a struggle with a filter. I'm a unapologetic workaholic, right? I'm from the New York region. Like, you are taught at an early age that your job is to work, and that and then maybe eat, and then maybe sleep, and then you'll see your family. And that was how I was trained, and that's what I came up with. And so when my wife gave birth to our first child 11 months ago, we had some conversations about, I recognize what I will miss, and I'm disappointed about that, but also these are the trade-offs. This is what you do when you're going to work. And it has been an enormous blessing for me for the last 6 months to be engaged in things that I didn't know I was going to be missing out on, because I was trained to just work. And, you know, so I've regained, just personally, you know, I'm a be in the office by 7 o'clock and get home from the office at 7 o'clock kind of guy. And it's just a cultural thing that I've been struggling with and working on for the last 10 years of my career. And I'm trying to get better at. And this 6 months has totally shifted that, where working from home means that I don't need to sign on to my first Zoom meeting till 8:30, 9 o'clock. And so I have all this time in the morning with our little guy, and then I can be done at 5:30 or 6, and I can pop down and spend time with him when there's a break. So I think that there are huge benefits to just changing your perspective about life. It's happened to me. I know it's happening to other people, and shifting people's priorities. But to your point, Justin, there is an element of people feeling like there's ways to get your job done, and we haven't fixed or altered our perspective on how to get those jobs done yet. Not enough time or creative thinking has taken place with that.
Those are great thoughts. It made me think, you know, number one, maybe there's going to be a little bit of an adjustment period post-pandemic with telework, where maybe some of that 59% will shift more into the 30% category of, you know, just once or twice a month. Maybe they'll think, okay, that Zoom fest of 6 months or 8 months that I had, that it was too much. Oh, now I can maybe adopt a 2 or 3 times a week pattern. But thinking differently about it. There are a couple of voices that have chimed into the conversation on chat.
Elizabeth Felix makes a really strong point in chat, right? Where my husband has been working from home since March, and one of the greatest struggles has been no separation between work and home. And I agree with that. When we were working on the survey, right, and you and I were talking through it, and we were having, I was one of those, you know, I would leave my computer at the office and work off of my phone. But there was a time where we were having conference calls at like 9:30 in front of our computers, and editing copy and all of that stuff, because there's this anticipation now that, with your cell phone and access, all of that, you could always be working, but now you're always at your office, and there is no divorce of that. So Elizabeth, that's a really strong point, really important point.
Yeah, David Gilner also chimed in on this same topic. So the face-to-face human interactions is missed by many of us, and his point is that things often take more time, lots more writing than it would be in person, just getting together, knocking something out versus trying to have to communicate via different means. Thanks for chiming in on that, David and Elizabeth. we've got 5 minutes left in the session, and Casey just chimed in also. My office is in my living room, and there is no way to ignore the computer after hours. So Steve Mumford has posed a question, and maybe we'll just end with this, and we'll ask Ted and Tom to speak maybe briefly to this, a couple of minutes each. He said, we're seeing a big influx of Californians and New Yorkers and perhaps others that are leaving expensive populated areas and moving to Utah, possibly due to teleworking. Should we be continuing to expect huge growth rates for years to come while out-of-staters move in? And with the teleworking changes, will the growth occur more in bedroom communities and more rural areas due mainly to low cost? And this is, he's getting at something, Ted, you've already spoken to a little bit, but maybe you can expand on that. And then Tom, maybe you want to weigh in on this, the tech and teleworking implications of this shift.
So Steve is asking another terrific question. And Steve, you should be on this panel. Let me just note that we actually don't know. I mean, these are questions that we need to track. There's confounding variables. One is that our economy is very strong here. So we may be attracting people from elsewhere in the country in part because we're firing on all cylinders economically still. Anecdotally, he's exactly right, though, that it's the most expensive housing markets are the places where people are fleeing is a little too strong. I would say they're no longer growing. The very expensive areas like the Bay Area, they're really not seeing, I think, a decline in population. They're just no longer growing right now. And we are seeing that relocation. I think that is a true point, and we have to track it. And again, because part of that is the confounding variable. But then there is the other question that he poses, which is within metro areas, which spots are going to do well and which spots are not going to do that well. There again, I think there's a bunch of questions there. Downtown Salt Lake City has seen no drop off in development activity or interest. And I know David Gellner's on, and he could perhaps comment on that. So there's no data to support the idea that downtowns are not attractive. Now, however, downtown Salt Lake City is a bargain compared to so many other downtown environments across the West. And so it's sort of competing against, Denver and Portland. It's competing against those kinds of peers for people that are attracted to the urban lifestyle. We have to wait and see. I would contend that a downtown that has a good amenity package may continue to be really attractive. My biggest concern, I'll just be honest, is with the built out communities that don't have a great amenity package because they're expensive because, relatively speaking, to places that have less accessibility. And they're more expensive because they're more accessible. But as accessibility reduces in how important it is to people, and those spots that don't also have a great amenity package, they might be the ones where we see not a lot of growth happening, and they actually start to decline over time. So I'm not going to name the community, but if that community sounds like yours, I think you ought to focus on it.
Okay, Tom, maybe while you can figure out what you're going to say, just a couple of thoughts here. Folks that are chiming in, there's been a request. As you chime in, make sure that you're chatting to all panelists and attendees. I think anything that was just to the panelists, I've read out loud, so hopefully you haven't missed out on anything. David Gellner, to Ted's point, he did chime in and say that they're very busy with new multifamily applications, have 3 large projects right now. Easy transit access seems to be the hotspots. And then Marcia White says, thanks for a great topic. I appreciate your shift from in-person to virtual panel. Hope you continue to collect data and share information. So Tom, any final thoughts you want to share?
So I just think Ted's been using this great phrase, and it's amenity package. And I love it. Right. I think that it's a great way to look at any kind of growth opportunity. People are going to move from New York, California, to Utah based on the economy, based on opportunities, but they're going to go where they want to go, and get what they want to get. And so I think that's really strong. I think in closing, because we're up against the time, I just want to leave you guys with this. The best job and the hardest job I ever had was when I was an elected city councilman. And because working with and managing and figuring out what's going on in your local community is really important, and it affects everyday life. I think there are those people participating in this panel. There are those that think that, your congressman, your state representative, those are the most important people you vote for. It's not. It's what happens on that city and school level that's going to affect your everyday life. As we look to impact and affect local change, we know that comes right here with you. And so we're interested in continuing to grow our relationship with your organizations, with your cities and towns, and ways to help implement opportunities that can shift perspective as it relates to air quality. And appreciate your perspective and what this could mean for growth here in Utah.
Thank you, Tom. With that, we're 1 minute over. One of the comments in the chat said, I'm just gonna, maybe this is a good note to end on, adaptability is important. We're headed into a future where nobody really knows what the answers will be, but we have the opportunity to shape some of those answers within our communities. To Tom's point, the work that you're doing is critically important. So we appreciate your participation. We appreciate you joining us. We really appreciate Tom and Ted and their expertise and bringing the knowledge that they have to share with us. And we hope that you continue to have a great conference.